What's up, legends, and welcome to an unmatched tier list, although I don't think it is the tier list that most people are hoping to see. That one should be out in a couple of weeks. Basically, I just made a strategy guide for Achilles. It was a really good video if I do say so myself, so you should definitely go check it out. But you should also go check it out because in that guide, I give my full insights, very detailed, the video's like an hour, of every single card. And this video is just focusing on this card, Battle Hardened, and kind of its application in the choices that it gives you. So I highly recommend going and watching the Achilles strategy guide first, and so you come back here with full context, and I think you'll be able to get a little bit more out of this video if you do that. So go click away, watch that video, and then come back here. And now that all the chumps are gone, we can actually get into the video. So basically, I'm going to be ranking each card as it pertains to how useful it is to recur that card with Battle Hardened. Basically, it's a ranking where the ideal options are cards that are pretty much universally always going to be amazing to get back. And there are cards that are also just great to get back, but perhaps not always ideal. Cards that are sometimes useful, but usually you're not going to take them back. And cards that if you do take back, I would ask you the question,
what are we doing?
This is your idea.
What are we doing?
God, that man is handsome. So again, this is in general. There are specific matchups where certain cards are really going to shine more than they would in other matchups, and I'm not really going to go into that. This is just going to be a very general ranking for all of Achilles matchups, and none in particular. So I think your ideal options that you're going to want to recur are actually Battle Hardened and Spear Throw. Spear Throw is probably very obvious. It deals 2 damage. That's amazing because it adds up. If you play both copies, it's 4 damage. If you play 3 copies, it's 6 damage. And if you play 1, 2, 3, 4 copies, that is 8 damage. And usually that combined with the damage you're dealing over the top of your enemy's block cards with your Angry Achilles Big Alice bonus, that's a lot of damage. And as Phil Swift would say, your enemy is going to die pretty quickly, and it helps you advance your win condition, and it's also a pass in terms of exhaustion. So it's just a very solid card, one of your best, if not the. And Battle Hardened is also a great card to take back. Of course, you can only recur it if you've already played 1 copy. So you're going to recur something else first, unless you play it while your discard pile is empty, which is... and so recurring a Battle Hardened might not seem super intuitive, because the only thing that recurring it would do is then allow you to recur something else on a future turn. But there's, I don't want to say degenerate, but there's a very cool strategy you can do where if your opponent has limited feints, like Little Red, Bullseye, Ghost Rider, Bloody Mary, where they only have 2 cancels, or they have no cancels like Invisible Man or Yanenga, then there's very little stopping you from just recurring Battle Hardens infinitely. And that can be a very useful tool because especially when you're angry, if you are attacking with this card, let's say you're in the Invisible Man matchup. This is a 4 value attack. Your opponent pretty much always wants to block 4 value attacks because that's a lot of damage they would take if they just took the attack. And so your opponent's going to block it. The Invisible Man, he has no cancels and he only has 15 block cards, I think. And so if you play this, you recur a Battle Hardened, and you can do that multiple times, your opponent is kind of like wasting resources while you're not, because at the end of the combat, you're technically not down a card, whereas they spent a block card. So eventually, if the game lasted quite a while, you could just run your opponent out of blocks by throwing Battle Hardens at them, assuming that they don't have any cancels available. And you can go almost infinite. Of course, I think your cycle is probably going to get cut a little bit short, because if you actually do end up winning the combat while you're angry, you're going to draw a card, which is going to make your deck thinner, and then you're going to reach exhaustion a little bit sooner. But it is a very good, I don't want to say like stall tactic, but it can help you wear down your opponent. And if they are spending a bunch of cards blocking not a super menacing attack, eventually when you try to land a big hit later in the game, maybe they have less options or no options, and that can be absolutely crucial for you. So just looping this is a very interesting tactic. And against characters with only 2 cancels, it's not guaranteed by any sense, but there's a lot less cancels you have to get through before it is particularly safe to start looping it for you. So these 2 cards, I think, are really going to shine in most, if not all, matchups, especially Spear Throw, just because of how crucial it is to your win condition. The next card we're going to talk about is Skirmish, because I think it is also a great card to take back. And we're going to talk about Skirmish in the context with the Handshake and the Heal. And the reason why the ranking turns out like this is basically because this card is blue, you can only block with it. This card is red, you can only attack with it. This card is purple, you can do both. They all have the same value, so in theory this card is, I don't want to say like strictly better, but it's a lot more flexible than these cards are. It is versatile even. And so I just think Skirmish is a better pickup than either of these cards in 99% of all scenarios. To break it down further, this card you can't attack with, so it's not really helping you progress your win condition, and it has a potential downside. It's like a solid block option otherwise. Not necessarily solid, I'll say all right, given the Summer of Legends 2022 semifinal I had versus Darkblade, where this card kind of screwed me, but no hard feelings. He earned it. Skirmish is a 4-value block with a potential upside. So, like, this card is just better unless you want to give your opponent actions, but generally you don't want to do that. You want to hit them with something that could be a 6. And speaking of which, this card, you're probably not going to recur it all that often while Pat is still alive for like the Jeet effect of gaining actions. Maybe you could do that to try to like put together more combo turns so that your opponent is really pressured early game, but I guess it kind of depends on how early you draw your Battle Hardens, and with only 2 copies, I don't know if you can reliably like recur this back while it's a 4, and you generally don't want to do that too many times anyways, because it is a log when you're angry, and this is also a log when you're angry, except it has a potential upside. So I think Skirmish is strictly better than both of these cards. This could be put here because a log is still a log, but just for the sake of being so sticking to my guns, I'm going to put them both in the hairy category. The double attack, I think, is also great to get back, especially just because of how efficient it is. You're throwing out 2 attacks in 1 action. You won't necessarily have all that many actions to attack with when you're angry. So getting this back and getting 2 more attacks for the price of 1 action could potentially be very helpful, especially because 5-value attack isn't necessarily anything to slouch with. I just think you won't always want 2 attacks depending on what your opponent's block situation is like, because if you draw 2 cards from winning both combats, that puts you very deep into exhaustion very quickly. So it's a very good card to get back, just be slightly careful. And the other great card is Feint. I think I'm going to order them like this. I think like from left to right is in general like better option, slightly less good option, but like I said, it's very general, and depending on the matchup, certain cards like Feint could be very ideal for you, particularly in matchups where your opponent is very effect dependent, like Sinbad or Little Red or Bloody Mary or Daredevil, where having 5 feints just completely shuts your opponent down. If Sinbad can't get any of his voyages off, he's going to have a bad time. And so Feint is one of those cards. It's a cancel. Having 5 of them is Bigfoot level. It's insane. And so it can really shine in certain matchups, but you can also attack with it, and it's a 4 value cancel, which could be very devastating into something like a Bewilderment or something that's very effect dependent on defense, like Looking Glass. Very good in that scenario. Just I think maybe like a third of the matchups, it's like a very good card. But there are some matchups like against Sherlock, you don't really want to recur Feint. But I think in general, it is a great thing to have back if you can get it back. The sometimes useful cards, I think Wily and Hermes kind of fill the same niche. Like I pointed out in my strategy guide, they're both solid 3 value blocks most of the time. This one's really good against ranged characters. This one's really good against melee characters. And I think Wily in general will be better to get back just because the effect is really good in certain matchups, like when your opponent has 1 health sidekicks, like Robin Hood or Wukong, and it does more, like it's an actively good effect when you're attacking, if you attack with these cards, versus this one, like you really don't want to attack with it, you're just going to block with it. And I think in general, when you're recurring cards, you probably want to get cards that you can attack with, or at least push your win condition a little bit more than playing on the safer side, unless you really need to play on the safer side, in which case you're playing not to lose instead of to win, and there's a whole argument to be made there. But you're probably not recurring these cards anyways, but I think if you are, Wily is probably the way to go. And Helm, I think, is also useful in matchups where you need to move 6 spaces with the boost, although I think it's kind of like a fallacy where if you're attacking with Battle Hardened to recur this so that on a future turn you can maneuver up and hit them, why not just hit them right away with like a big attack instead of putting a smaller one out to help you hit something on a future turn? And if you're blocking with Battle Hardened to get this back to maneuver boost up to your opponent, well, that means your opponent is attacking you, which probably means you're going to be in a position to make an attack back on your turn. So I don't know how often the situation actually comes up where you get this back to boost with it for the reasons I just explained, but there could be, if you get this and Battle Hardened early, you can play this right away, get your opponent to smack Pat, and if he isn't dead in a turn or two, you can play this to recur it and then make it so basically Pat is going to die if your opponent attacks either of your fighters, which could be useful, I guess, but I'd rather just save a Battle Hardened and try to get something better back later in the game. But there is a play to be made there where you just yeet Pat off the board super quickly, and maybe that's how you win depending on the matchup. But I think in general you're not really going to recur this card because just when Pat is dead, it's usually only good as a boost, and like I mentioned, you're not really going to be in a situation where if you need it to boost to reach your opponent, like you're not really going to have a chance to recur it, I guess. And the Pat cards are also going in the hairy category just because, like I said at the beginning of the video, when you're playing Battle Hardened and recurring it, you're probably, like Pat is probably long gone. And I don't really see the use in recurring them just because early game, there's usually a plethora of cards that just help you kill Pat. Your opponent could help you kill Pat, and I don't think it's worth using one of your 2 potential unique Battle Hardened recursions on these cards. I think it's better to just wait out to draw the other copies if you're so adamant about killing Pat, and then use this like later in the game or just earlier in the game for like a different card. So like, I don't know. In all my experiences playing Achilles, like I've never really recurred any of these cards. It's mostly just these 5, but like I said, situationally, every single card could be useful. It's just these are the ones where those situations come up more often, or they just come up at all. So yeah, let me know what you think of this tier list. What cards do you generally recur with Battle Hardened? What helps you win most as Achilles? And maybe give me some matchups where you'd want to recur some of these cards. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. Hopefully you're coming here from the Achilles video, but if for some reason you've made it this far and haven't actually watched the Achilles strategy guide, go watch that now. Hopefully you like this little deep dive into like the decisions that can arise from just this one card and how interesting recursion is in this game. Yeah, and thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful night. And as always, like, subscribe, and yeet!